Thank y'all very much. I get to speak to a lot of different crowds, but most of them I don't love as much as this one, and most of them aren't as friendly as this one is to me. Thank you very much for having me tonight. When we heard about this event, I said, yeah, absolutely, I want to be there to connect with what I believe is representation of the heart and soul of Tennessee and the Farm Bureau and what it represents, the agriculture industry in this state, and the people is really what it represents, the people that make this state such an incredible place to be and live. And we are very, very fortunate to be Tennesseans. I have spent a lot of time the last year talking to a lot of governors, dealing with a lot of challenges that everyone's facing in their states, and we have a lot of challenges in Tennessee, but we have so many things going in the right direction in this state. There are so many things about the way our state has been managed and the people of Tennessee. It makes me incredibly proud, and you should be very proud, because the more I'm in this job, the more I realize how fortunate you and I are to live in this great state, and how fortunate we are to be engaged in agriculture. It's very near and dear to my heart. Jeff and I were talking earlier about when I first started showing up at the Farm Bureau to talk to the leadership there. Jeff and Radonna, all of the leadership, about the idea that I might think about running for governor. And this was a few years ago. And we had great interaction. And I remember leaving, one of the first times I met there, I took the bylaws book with me. And in the beginning of it, as you know, there's a philosophy statement. And when I got home, I opened that up and I read the philosophy of the Farm Bureau. And I remember the next time I talked to Jeff and Radonna and leadership, I held up the book and I said, I just read this philosophy. And if this is what you believe, if this is really what you believe, then this is an organization that should wholeheartedly be supported, because the tenets of the beliefs of this organization, from faith to family to farming and everything in between, is powerful. And it is something that we should never steer away from, and we should never let diminish. And in fact, we should do everything we can to strengthen and uphold that foundation in this state. I have enjoyed the opportunities that I have had as governor to put an emphasis and a focus on agriculture, and particularly on rural Tennessee. I had the privilege of, I've now signed, unfortunately, I think I've signed 68 executive orders. Probably 65 of them occurred since March. But, and everybody's not happy about that. But the very first executive order that I signed as governor was an executive order number 1 to strengthen the economy of rural Tennessee. And we, from the very beginning, have been focused on how it is that we can make sure that everyone in this state understands, from downtown Nashville to downtown Memphis to downtown Johnson City, that what happens in rural Tennessee matters to every Tennessean, no matter where they live. And the economies of our rural communities and the ag economy, which is the largest sector of our economic engine here in Tennessee, the economies of our rural communities are incredibly important if we're going to have a stable statewide economy. So we started with executive order number 1 and have worked tirelessly since then to make sure that we are moving in the right direction for all of Tennessee, and especially for rural Tennessee. I'm proud that when we came into office, we had 15 distressed counties. We put a real emphasis on distressed counties. We had a distressed county, we had a rural county summit and brought leadership, and part of that leadership were leaders in Farm Bureau, but we had a rural Tennessee summit and brought together all of those 15 distressed counties. We brought together every cabinet member from the state into those meetings. The first one was out in Linden or in Perry County, and we talked about how important rural Tennessee is. We connected leaders with leaders in state government so they would know how it is that we work and how we can work together. And we began across every department in the state. I required every department in the state, because of Executive Order Number 1, to give me a statement and a purpose and a strategic plan how their department was going to strengthen the rural counties in this state. We've had really 1 year, we're into our second year, but we've gone from 15 distressed counties in Tennessee to 11 distressed counties in 1 year. My goal is that we don't have distressed counties when I get out of here. I don't know if we can get there or not, but that's one of my goals. We'll continue to work on it, remembering the strength of the economies in rural Tennessee. We have funded ag education. You all know one of the most challenging things that we faced in this year, besides COVID, has been the economic results of COVID. So we did what was the right thing to do in March, and we took everything off the table that was an increase in funding from our previous year's budget. We took it all off the table. Every initiative that we had, everything that we had been working for, and that throughout that, after the first session, creating a budget, we had an ag enhancement improvement, we had a enterprise fund improvement, we had enhanced an additional ag education funding. We did ag education funding in the first budget that separated 4-H from FFA and strengthened funding for both of them individually so they'd have committed futures. But we've had to make some very difficult funding decisions this year. As you all know, every department's had to make cuts. But fortunately, our economy is in a strong place. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And we're working on our budgets now, and we're hoping to be able to restore some of the things that we had to take off the table in March. But we've invested in ag education. We've invested in rural economies, and we've done so even through this pandemic. So one of the things that happened when COVID hit is, as you know, we had this huge amount of federal funding that came into our state. $2.3 billion came to the governor's office to determine how that money would be spent across the state. My belief was that first we had to spend it on health funding to fight COVID, which we did. That's why Tennessee was one of the very first states in the country to offer free testing for every citizen who wanted it in every county in Tennessee, regardless of their symptoms. Very few states offered free asymptomatic testing early on. And because of that, we were able to mitigate the spread. But we paid for COVID testing for everyone in this state, continuing to do so. We paid for PPE, especially one of the pieces I'm most proud of is the fact that we wanted to get our kids back in school in person. That ain't happening all across America either. But in Tennessee, we had a commitment to make sure that happened. So we committed to provide every single classroom with monthly supplies of PPE so teachers would be safe and students would be safe. 80,000 PPE packets sent out to every classroom in Tennessee. Because of that, our schools have been, for the most part, except for two big districts, one of them partially open, one of them not open at all, but every other district, every other of our 127, I believe that's right, school districts is open in person in Tennessee. We have 75% of our kids are attending schools in person. And we have had less than 0.5% of any school closed at any one time throughout this pandemic because of the efforts that we've made to make it safe for teachers and schools. It was very important to me that we do that, and I'm proud of the fact that we've done that. Talking about education, in our first year, we funded something called the GIVE Act. Y'all probably know about that, but I have a background in plumbing and pipe fitting and welding electrician. And I have strongly believed that for way too long, our schools do not have enough focus on vocational, technical, and agricultural education. So we set up the GIVE Act, which allowed for dual credit for kids taking vocational, technical, and agriculture classes for college in high school. And we doubled the amount of dual enrollment that could occur. And we also gave 25 $1 million grants to high school programs across the state that were creating or expanding their vocational, technical, agricultural programs. I think when we started that GIVE Act initiative, which is one of the pieces of legislation I'm most proud of, I said high school needs to look different in Tennessee, and it's going to. And kids that have giftings and skills that may not be what traditionally takes them to a four-year college, but they have skills that connect their brains to their hands that a lot of other kids don't have. We need to make pathways for success for every single one of those kids. And that's what the GIVE Act is going to do. And it is, I don't think I've had a better moment in my 2 years as being governor as standing in a welding shop in a rural county, handing out $1 million grant to a CTE program and looking into the eyes of kids that are in a welding class who maybe for the first time are excited about what they're doing in school. And I tell those kids, I look at them, I say, we need you to pursue this pathway. We need you to stay in your rural counties. We need you to build the economies out here, and we need the workforce that's created by vocational, technical, and agricultural education. We're working to continue that move as we develop our budget this year for where education heads. Education will be a major initiative. It'll be a major focus of our legislative work that you'll be seeing unfold in the next few months. I talked a little bit about CARES Act funding. I'll tell you, of this $2.3 billion, in my view, we needed to push a lot of that money out to the people. So we put, I talked about healthcare funding being first and making sure that we took care of this COVID challenge that we have from a health perspective. But my belief is that this pandemic is not just about saving lives, it's about saving livelihoods. It's the reason we ought not to shut down our economies as a result of COVID. People have to continue. There is much loss beyond life and health that occurs when we shut states down. And we saw that in the very early days of this pandemic. But in order to do that, we've had businesses, ag businesses, farming businesses, every kind of business suffer as a result of the lack of revenues through the state. So through this virus. So when we got this $2.3 billion, my focus as a former business person was to make sure people could keep their businesses open and keep people employed through this. So we pushed $300 million in direct grants and funds to businesses that suffered a downturn as a result of COVID. That's a substantial amount of money pushing it. And 90% of the businesses we pushed them out to had revenues of $500,000 or less. So these are all small businesses that were recipients of these grants and of these direct funding programs. We had $210 million in our fiscal 21 budget for local governments and local municipalities, counties and municipalities. In the midst of an economic crisis, you do not need counties to have to raise property taxes because of the costs and the downturn in the revenues that each one of them faces. Not only did we push that out in that budget, that we took $150 million more dollars from the CARES Act money and pushed it directly to local governments. We had already funded $40 million for broadband expansion. I believe that if people are going to work in rural communities, if they're going to get health care via telehealth, and we passed a telehealth bill in the special session this year because it's so important, but if they're going to work and they're going to go to school and they're going to get health care in a rural community, they got to have broadband. We had already spent $40 million in broadband. We took $60 million of the CARES Act funding And we did $60 million worth of broadband projects that'll be finished by December 31st across the state. My goal, while I'm in office, is to have broadband to every corner, every county, every community in Tennessee, because that's how our rural communities can connect to the technology needed, whether it's ag, and you all know how important technology is for agriculture, especially the emerging ag tech business that Tennessee can lead this country in if we do it right. Broadband expansion is very important. That's why we spent that money directly from the CARES Act. And finally, we spent $50 million specifically for ag and forestry businesses out of the CARES Act money. I worked with Dr. Hatcher to construct that plan to make sure that the ag businesses that needed it most, that had suffered the most through the pandemic, would get that relief, and we pushed that $50 million in addition to the $300 million that we pushed out to other businesses. So and I'll say the final thing we did, which was the largest component of the CARES Act funding that we did, and there's a lot of talk about CARES Act funding, but it matters. This is a lot of money that had to be pushed to the right places in order for our state to continue to function economically. There's an unemployment trust fund that exists at the state. If the unemployment trust fund in Tennessee stays above $1 billion, then businesses do not have to increase their amount of payment that they make for unemployment insurance. If the trust fund falls below $1 billion, every business in Tennessee has to pay additional premiums for unemployment insurance. It was incredibly important to me that companies did not, businesses, large and small, any kind of business, did not have to increase their unemployment payment benefits in the midst of a pandemic. So we took the largest portion of our CARES money, and we have, throughout this pandemic, when we've paid out hundreds of millions of dollars of unemployment benefits, we have kept our unemployment benefit trust fund at $1 billion to make sure there's no additional premiums on any businesses. Let me tell you, that doesn't happen in every state. In fact, right now, I believe, if at latest count, there's 21 states in the country that have fully depleted their unemployment trust fund through this pandemic. And they're borrowing money to make unemployment payments right now. That will take them years to overcome that. I say all that because I view my job, my number one job in this state, is making sure that Tennessee is fiscally responsibly managed. I was incredibly proud that last year we were named the best fiscally managed state in America by U.S. News and World Report. That matters because that means that we don't have to raise taxes on people in this state, even when we face a significant economic decline like we have in Tennessee. The good news of all this, in investing in businesses, investing in ag, investing in agriculture, is that our economy is actually going to have higher revenues in 2020 than it had in 2019 in spite of the pandemic. Our businesses have stayed afloat. Our companies are continuing to move forward. They're struggling, it's difficult, but our revenues are actually higher than they were last year, which means that we're not going to have to raise taxes. It means that we are going to be able to restore our budget and begin to put back funding into the things that matter the most. And that is one reason that we are very, very fortunate to be Tennesseans. And that isn't because of me. That's because of leadership prior to me coming here, and then my decision to just double down on what it is that Tennessee's done in years past. I'll talk just a little bit about COVID because it matters to every single one of us. We have a serious health pandemic in this country. There's plenty of arguments about how serious or what's real and what, but let me just tell you, it's serious. We have 2,500 people in the hospital in Tennessee right now suffering from COVID. That is 1,000 more people than we had just 6 weeks ago. I just did an executive order number 67 to allow the National Guard to use medics throughout the National Guard to supplement our hospitals. We have a strong partnership with our healthcare partners all across the state, and our hospitals are doing an incredible job of managing this crisis and making sure that we protect especially the most vulnerable. By the way, we were the first state to announce that we would test every nursing home resident and every staff member in every one of our 700 nursing homes across this state. We worked hard from the very beginning to not only be the best tested state in the country, but to take care of those that are going to be hurt the most, and those are the elderly in our nursing homes in congregate care. Nevertheless, there's been a lot of loss of life. There's been a lot of sickness. You probably all know somebody in your community who has passed away as a result of COVID. We all have to step up together and make this happen. We all have to do our part and stay apart and wear our masks and be sensible, especially now that it's cold and especially now that the numbers are really climbing. We can do that. We can do it together. The government doesn't force people to do that. People choose to do that. And I have a strong belief in the people of Tennessee that we will, in fact, navigate our way through it. We're in the worst of it right now. But I was with Vice President Pence on Thursday, and we met, and then we did a little press conference there in Memphis talking about the vaccine that's coming out. We should have a vaccine beginning to be put in people's arms here in about another week. We don't know exactly what day it's going to come out. Might be the 16th, 17th, 18th, but we'll have it. And we have an incredibly strong plan in this state. I'm really proud. Tennessee was one of 4 states chosen by Pfizer to pilot their distribution rollout because they liked our plan so much. President Trump's invited me to the White House on Tuesday along with 2 other governors to talk about, with the Secretary of Health and Human Services, to talk about our plan, how we structured it, how we're going to pull it off. That they believe that our plan, and Dr. Redfield of the CDC said that Tennessee's plan was arguably the best distribution vaccine plan of all the states in the country. I'm proud of what our team's done to put it together, but we got another week, and we're going to get it. We're going to start this distribution plan. And the day we start it is the day that we'll begin to turn the corner on COVID-19. I'm very encouraged about the prospects of that. And the people that are going to get it first are healthcare workers in our state. We had the option to choose who gets it first. It'll be healthcare workers so we can keep healthcare capacity in our state, and it will be the elderly in nursing homes. And then we'll begin to move down into different levels of population. So there's a lot to say about that, and you'll hear a lot more about that in the next few weeks as vaccine hits the market. Expect to have potentially 40 million people vaccinated by the end of December, and that will be a significant turn in this horrifically challenging year as a result of COVID-19. I'll stop so I can answer some questions. Oh wow, yeah, I talked way too long. Let me just, but I'm on the one hand, it's serious what we got and the challenges we have, but on the other hand, I'm as hopeful a guy as can be about what's coming for this state. Not just because of the position that we're in as Tennesseans, but I'm a guy who, my faith in Christ is the most important thing in my life. I have been through, just like you have, great challenges in my life, tragedies in my life, difficulties, struggles. And somehow God seems to take the very worst days of our lives if we submit them to Him. And the greatest tragedies become our greatest transformational moments. They certainly have been in my personal life. I think that is true for our state. I think that's true for the challenge that we faced. We've learned so much about so many things. We're going to be so much better when we get through this. I think there are very bright days ahead for us. I'm excited about what 2021 is going to look like. I'm excited about the enhanced movement of our economy. I'm especially excited about the economies of rural Tennessee and their continued improvement. I'm excited about the agriculture industry today. I was putting out hay with my 3-year-old granddaughter on the farm, just thinking about how blessed I am to have grown up in a family that understands how valuable the ag industry really is. And you all know, like many Tennesseans don't know, you know how resilient how strong, how hardworking, how we can go through difficult things. Farmers know, if anybody knows, that good times and bad times come and we make our way through them. We trust God in it, and He always shows up. He will do that again. Our best days are ahead of us. I'm very hopeful. I'm very encouraged about it. But it isn't the government that solves the greatest challenges of our day. Government is not the answer to the biggest things that we face. We are a government of the people. The people are the answer to addressing the challenges of the day, whether it's COVID, to economics, to agriculture, to life-saving pieces of legislation that I'm proud of, like the most sweeping pro-life reform legislation that's ever passed in the state of Tennessee. The people of Tennessee have the heart, they have the values, they have the tenacity to endure whatever comes their way. And you all know that far more than most. I'm proud of what you're doing. I'm proud of what our state is doing, and I am grateful to God for the days that lie ahead of us. Thank you very much.